Hello and welcome to Streamers and Punches, the podcast from Sound Notion TV that looks at current events and new releases in the world of film music. My name is Bill Witham.
And I'm Kevin Wilt.
And on today's show, we're going to look at a couple articles, talk a little bit about some of the songs approaching in the Oscar the Oscar event coming up soon, and look at a couple things that we've been listening to this week. First off, there's an article that we found. Folk legend confers with John Williams on his score to the recent Steven Spielberg film War Horse. Kevin, you saw this. What were some of the things that the article talked about?
The basic idea behind the article, there is a folk musician from Britain who was called in kind of as a consultant to John Williams. This film was obviously a period piece, and so it was basically up to this guy to explain, okay, this is what music in this part of Britain would sound like or would have sounded like around the time of World War I. And he basically just says, we had a lot of conference calls and emails and things like that. Who knows how much of an input this guy was really kind of responsible for or whatever. It was just interesting to hear about this kind of collaboration. There was part of the article that did make me sad, though. And explaining his collaboration with John Williams, he says, I never actually got to meet him. He said, we have a lot of phone calls and emails. But, he's 80 years old. He can't really fly anymore, so he never came to England. It's like, quit telling me that John Williams is old. I know he's old. Just stop it.
Yeah.
It was, interesting. The end result certainly still sounds like a lot of John Williams writing that quasi-John Williams English music. But,
Yeah.
It's an interesting article to take a look at over at Ripley and Henor News. We'll put a link up on our website, soundnotion.tv/SAP. You can check out the article for yourself.
Okay. All right. The next article we want to look at is an interesting one, to say the least. The composer, there's a living composer who gets a lot of performances in the concert hall these days, and he scores a lot of films, not necessarily large sort of summer tentpole famous action mainstream movies, nevertheless. But
he's not. But he's. We look at a lot of big name concert composers who also do occasional film scores. Like Philip Glass or someone. They tend to do kind of more smaller art house things. We should mention that Bill, the composer you're going to mention, he may not do big summer blockbusters, but a lot of them are still Hollywood films produced by reputable directors. Most namely, he's scored the last few Francis Ford Coppola films. So
yeah. Well,
not
yeah.
completely interrupt what you're talking about. But
yeah, we're talking about, depending on how you like to pronounce it, either Osvaldo or Oswaldo Golijov. And he's a composer who recently was a composer in residence with Chicago Symphony. And I'm not sure if he's still at that position. I honestly haven't read up on him lately as to what his activities are.
No, the Chicago Symphony has two now younger composers in residence.
Right. Mason Bates and
right.
Female composer.
And Anne Klein, I think is her name. So,
okay.
Golijov is not in that position anymore.
He's moved on. Okay,
right.
well, we should mention that he's won Grammys, he's won lots of awards as well as composition prizes. So he's no unknown in the world of music, and he's worked with Francis Ford Coppola with his film Youth Without Youth from a few years ago. So anyway, what I wanted to bring up was recently he had a premiere of a new piece of his, and the name of that piece is Siderius, and it's about a 9-minute concert piece. It premiered, actually, technically in 2010. It premiered, and basically the article positions that this piece contains large portions, or at least a large chunk of which is familiar-sounding material from an earlier piece of his called Barbiche or Barbike. I'm not sure. Barbeich.
Something German looking.
Yeah, it looks German, although he's not German, so I don't really know the correct pronunciation there. So apologies to the classical music world, of which I'm completely devastating it. But anyway, I should mention that the article positions this opinion from two people who are basically saying, I think I heard this, and it sounded totally like this other piece of his because I was in an orchestra that played that piece, and it just sounds like the same piece. So it's a little bit dangerous to, I feel like from a journalistic point of view, to write an entire article where your whole sort of evidence or your proof is based on essentially hearsay from two people. Although maybe they both kind of are in agreement, there's no one saying, I've looked at a score, I have recordings of both pieces, I have the orchestral score of both pieces. No one actually has stepped forward and said, and yes, there are large sections that are similar. Mm-hmm. But I think what's worth bringing up is that if there is some merit to this accusation, it wouldn't be the first time that anyone who's written for film has been accused of taking large amounts of music from something they've previously written and used it over. Nor would this be the first time that a concert composer has been accused of that. So a part of me is kind of like, I feel sort of like that it's not really that big of a deal, that somehow they're trying to find some controversy in the art and cultural world that they can, fill up a blog about. Right. And secondly, I don't find it that much of an unprecedented activity, whether it's even true or not. And so,
and it's to me, even in the article that we're mentioning, this is on registerguard.com. The piece that they're saying Golijov has plagiarized is not a completely unknown piece. It says in the program notes that he's borrowing the melody from this other composer. So it's not like he's saying, oh, it's completely mine, it's completely original. He's saying, no, I'm borrowing content from this other composer. I'm writing a different piece based on the same material. So at that point, it seems to maybe become just a semantic argument of at what point are you borrowing and at what point are you plagiarizing? I mean, it's not like he's denying it. He's saying right in the program notes, right. I'm using this composer's melody. It's just a different piece. And I think you're right. Some of it, this piece was commissioned by the Eugene Symphony, and it gets their name in the article, and it gets people stirred up and all that kind of crap.
Yeah, well, I mean...
Now, I've heard the Golijov piece. I've not heard the piece that people are saying he plagiarized. So I can't necessarily make the same comparison, but...
Yeah, but I think we can also state that, so what? It happens. They do try to support his case by saying, well, Beethoven borrowed from Mozart and things like that. But in this day and age, when these composers who still operate in the traditional sense, that is, I mean, I've heard John Adams has a personal assistant, but basically John Adams still produces his own music, although I'm sure he has some help. They're not in the position that Hollywood composers find themselves in, when they can compose in a shorthand score and literally hand it off to an orchestrator, who then hands it off to parts copyists, who then hands it to the orchestra, and then a separate conductor comes in. And so every stage in the process is done by a different person. In the classical music world, at least from my own experience, and I believe yours too, Kevin, we do a lot of the work ourselves. So when you have to do that, you're very busy. And when you have to have instant inspiration for your next commission, that sometimes the ideas don't come to you. And so maybe you take an idea that you started in another piece, and maybe you give it a second look, and from there on, maybe you go in a different direction with it. So anyway, I don't find it that provocative of a topic, and find it a little silly, and maybe it doesn't look so good upon those that reported it, thinking that it would stir up a little bit of interest and
right.
Sort of.
And this, I mean, this idea of composers borrowing, I mean, it's as old as music itself. There's that famous Stravinsky quote, good composers borrow, great composers steal. It's this, our pieces in some way or another are, directly related to the music that we absorb. And that's certainly not saying it's the same thing as plagiarism, but I don't know. It's like I said, I haven't heard the other piece. It just seems like a very weak argument. I mean, when the whole argument of the article, like you said, Bill, is these two people say, "Oh, hey, this sounds like that other piece I know," and that's kind of as far as the investigation goes.
Yeah, it's kind of like they went to a traffic accident and they said, "Did you see it?" Well, no, but I heard it, and it sounded like this other accident that I've seen. So,
right.
it was just, it's kind of silly. Anyway, that's enough. That's enough about that. There's not really that much more to talk about. If you want to read the original article, you can definitely check out the link at our Sound Ocean website. Next up, even though, as we've been documenting very well, there's going to be no performances of Oscar-nominated score music or Oscar-nominated songs for the upcoming ceremony. However, Danny Elfman gets a lucky break, apparently. Kevin, you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, this has to do. We've mentioned several times throughout this year that Danny Elfman composed the score to a new Cirque du Soleil show called Iris. And like you said, Bill, over the past couple of weeks, we've mentioned that the two Oscar-nominated songs for Best Original Song will not be performed as part of the part of the Oscar telecast, which I think is disappointing. But here now they've announced that Cirque du Soleil will be performing as part of the Oscar telecast, performing part of this new score by Danny Elfman, because apparently this new Cirque du Soleil show is quote cinema themed. So I just find it's ridiculous, and it just makes me mad that they don't have time to play the two whole Oscar nominated songs, including the fantastic Man or Muppet that we listened to last week, and it's wonderful. But they have time to put a Cirque du Soleil thing on the broadcast.
Let alone they don't even, they're playing his music, which is for orchestra and weird dancers, and they're not playing any of the orchestra. Right. They're not even playing a film. Actual film music from any of the composers nominated. So I mean, just for a moment, forget the songs. They're not even, they're playing Elfman's music.
Right.
Anyway,
it's not music from a film. It's not from a Cirque du Soleil film. It's literally, the only reason is that it's, like I said, it is a cinema-themed Cirque du Soleil show, which that's a pretty loose, crappy connection to put something on the Oscar broadcast.
Yeah.
It's whatever.
Yeah, it is what it is. Well, yeah, hopefully they'll learn that it'll be a really crappy broadcast, and it's probably not going to be hosted all that well.
Because that has stopped them in the past from doing other crappy Oscar broadcasts. Uh-huh.
I mean, the only glimmer of hope is that they did announce that the Muppets would be there to possibly guest host one small portion of it, which probably means they'll come out and present one award, and that might be the highlight, that the charming highlight, and that might be about it. But anyway. At least the composers will win something, and they'll have to be there. So at least one of them will get up and get to speak, and that'll be good for them. So anyway, enough about that, because we're going to come right back to the Oscars here in just a little bit. But next up, what we've been listening to this week. Kevin, talk about what you've been listening to.
Well, I haven't been watching a whole lot in terms of television or films, but I have been playing the very addicting Batman Arkham City video game, which if you have not tried it or seen trailers of it, it's a pretty fantastic game. And I think I talked very briefly about this score a while back, and this was before I even got the game. But the music is composed by Nick Arundel and Ron Fish, who are kind of like audio designers and things as well for the game, is my understanding. The score, it's very effective. I'm not sure how much, if any of it, was recorded with a live orchestra. It certainly sounds very convincing if it wasn't. Some of the main action types of things, it's very, very clearly reminiscent of the Hans Zimmer, James Newton Howard Batman material from Batman Begins and Dark Knights. But there are also some other nice moments that kind of stand out, and it certainly fits the tone of the game and everything very well. It's and the CD is available just as a separate soundtrack, which I feel like we see more and more of nowadays with video game scores. It's again, stylistically, I would imagine that DC Comics and Warner Brothers kind of said, all right, we're trying to, even though it's different characters and a different look, we're trying to kind of maintain our Batman universe, if you will. So the more you can make it sound like Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard, the better. And like I said, at moments, it really, really does. It kind of has that minor third ostinato running strings kind of thing that we've talked about in the past. But it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you like video games at all. It's not only a very good score, but a fantastic video game.
Okay.
And Bill, you said, we've talked a few times now about Cliff Martinez and his score to Drive, and so you've been checking that out this week. Is that right?
Yes, I finally got that from Netflix, and the movie was pretty good. It was a little bit of what I expected because of all the reviews I had read that kind of said it's not what you would expect. So by virtue of that, I kind of was prepared for a slightly more artistic action movie, I guess. I don't know if that's what you want to describe it, but it definitely had moments that were very atmospheric, and the score went along really well with that. In fact, there's certain things about it aesthetically, like some of what people dressed as, the way the font looks on the opening credits, and the songs that were chosen that give it kind of a look and feel of the 1980s. Mm-hmm. And so when Cliff Martinez comes in with mostly these kind of ambient synthesized layers of sound, it does kind of feel reminiscent of, I don't want to say Risky Business with Tangerine Dream, but maybe.
When I think of like 80s synth scores and things like that, the first thing that always comes to mind is Beverly Hills Cop.
Yeah, Beverly Hills.
Is it kind of anything in that direction?
Not exactly. Beverly Hills Cop is more of like conventional action, and this movie's approach, and it's part of this director Nicholas Winding Refn, who was behind this. Everything's more of a slow burn, like it's almost like longer takes that make for very awkward and suspenseful moments. So that worked really well in the film, and the music just kind of picks up its cue from that. No pun intended on the cue there, but I think it just sort of takes its hint that, okay, I'm going to have these long layers of sound, and they're going to be kind of contributing to this slow burn, suspenseful approach. Mm-hmm. So in a stylistic way, in a very, I guess, a very shrewd way of looking at it, it's not necessarily all that different from Trent Reznor and that whole style of let me score Social Network or Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and just go for a bunch of like layers of sound. But I kind of did like the sounds. I mean, that's about all I can say. I didn't. You can't listen to the tune and hum along and snap your fingers if that's what you're wanting. You're not going to get that. But it definitely would work really well. In the background of something, it's mood music. But the film is a very moody film, and I thought it was very well scored, and so it's memorable from a sound standpoint, but not so much from any kind of traditional musical texture approach that has happened in films before, where you have a melody, you have harmony, you have accompaniment, you have rhythm. It sort of took a whole different approach to remove most of those in favor of just supporting with an atmospheric mood. And I don't necessarily think that's wrong for certain films. I mean, it's totally fine. But it, as we all know, it wouldn't float in a concert hall. But this is not a concert hall, so
exactly, that's not its job. Now, we've mentioned a few times over the past few weeks that there has been kind of this general sense that Drive as a film in general and Cliff Martinez score to Drive specifically have been largely overshadowed in the award season, and that both the film and the score maybe should have been nominated for Oscars and things like that. How do you feel about that argument now that you've seen the film and heard the score?
Part of me feels like it might just be overpraised, but like we mentioned before, John Williams doesn't need 2 nominations on there, and so I would say you could remove one of those and put Drive in there. Like I said before, I also liked Rango and I liked Hannah, but they're not there either. Well,
Rango we knew wasn't going to be there because Hans Zimmer wasn't going to do the paperwork.
Yeah, that's true. And of course, the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is not there.
Yeah.
Which I'd say, yeah, you could just take out one of the Williams scores and put either this Rango, Hannah, or Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, just to have a score with a completely different aesthetic and a completely different approach, but one that's still actually really effective and I think kind of contributes to the artistic quality of the film. I think it really does do that. It's not. I don't think it's pretentiously, put together. I think it's a genuine atmospheric kind of score, and I liked it and I appreciate it for that.
Do you think it's a score worth listening to aside from the film, or do you think it's best digested within the context of the film?
I mean, if you see the film and you kind of think, I want to hear, upon closer examination, I'd like to check it out. Yeah, I mean, give it a listen. If you just say, I'm a big fan of Cliff Martinez, then that's fine. I think you'll probably find something to like there if you are already familiar with his stuff. In general, if mostly what you like to listen to is Hans Zimmer and John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith, you could listen to this and you'd probably feel somewhat like it was a lacking experience. Mm-hmm. But I think if you've seen the film and you know what you're in for and you want, a sonic souvenir from the film, then I think it fits that bill pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, next up, we're going to pick up with our part 2 of our Oscar song spotlight. So last week we looked at Man or Muppet, which was composed and the words were provided by Brett McKenzie. That is the first Oscar nomination for Best Song this year. The next one is Real in Rio. And Kevin, do you think it's Real in Rio or Real in Rio?
Real in Rio? I don't know. That's a good question. I have a feeling I would.
Real would be royal, right?
Right, exactly. I don't know. My guess is it's Real in Rio, but I haven't seen the cartoon, the film, so I don't know.
I did look up. I looked up Real to define it, and it actually is a Spanish currency. But I don't know if the opening of this movie shows a bunch of birds buying things with their money. So
no idea.
I don't think that's what it is. So I'm going to call it Real in Rio for now.
I would just say that it's in one sense it's kind of nice that we only have 2 Oscar nominated songs to talk about, because if there had been the 4 or 5 nominations that there usually are, that meant we would have actually had to be on our guard and actually start doing this several weeks ago. But since there's only 2 songs, we don't really have to plan that far ahead. It just took 2 weeks to cover them. So
it appeals to our lack of preparation.
Right. It's exactly.
Well, now here's something that's interesting. For the longest time, I had seen the people associated with Real in Rio, and they were Sergio Mendes and Carlinos Brown, with lyrics by Sida Garrett. And I thought, okay, these people are fine, but John Powell is involved. And when I went to the Oscar page for nominations for this year, his name is not anywhere. And of course, for our listeners, John Powell is the composer who created the score for the entire movie. And I'm sure that someone on John Powell's orchestration team is responsible for helping out with the song, because we're going to play a little bit of it, and I think you'll hear some of the orchestration when we do play it. So actually, without talking about it anymore, let's just go ahead and listen to a little excerpt from Real in Rio.
Okay.
Okay, so it's about a minute there. Not the entire song, but I think enough to get a sense for, it's kind of like they even quote Carnival in the words of the song, and so you get a feeling that it's sort of a big celebration, a big festivity. Kevin, any first impressions on that?
I think,
or maybe you've already heard it.
I think you're certainly onto something with the whole kind of production aspect of it, the orchestrator aspect of it. There's, with all that percussion and things like that, there is certainly a kind of a sense of a cinematic scope, if you will. I don't know the John Powell score for that film very well. I would imagine that it's at least the instrumental writing or the nature of the timbres and colors and things like that is probably related. You're right. I'm kind of surprised too that John Powell has had nothing to do with this song. Sometimes it works out that way. Sometimes it doesn't. I mean, kind of off the top of my head, I think of the past few James Bond opening theme songs, that some of them David Arnold has written himself. Some of them he's written with other performers that sing them, and then others he had nothing to do with whatsoever. I know with like Tomorrow Never Dies, he wrote a theme song with K.D. Lang, and it was never used as the theme song. They brought in Sheryl Crow to write the theme song, and then they stick the K.D. Lang song at the end. So sometimes when there are songs like these, you see the composer involved. Other times not. I think you're right that you're listening to it. You get a sense that there is kind of a film cinematic quality to it. That you wonder if there was actually zero involvement from John Powell and his team, but. It's certainly interesting. Some of the it kind of starts off with more of a sound effect kind of texture, and eventually builds to this kind of festival, carnival kind of music. It's kind of cool. It's certainly not funny and enjoyable like Man or Muppet, but nonetheless, still very nice.
Just a couple of quick thoughts on it. It does have a very cool opening. I truncated that a little bit, but if you go listen to, Spotify or listen to it on YouTube, it has a very slow beginning with mostly bird sounds, and then you add in what sounds kind of like a woodpecker, which then doubles as some Latin percussion, and then all of a sudden it sort of transforms into basically a Latin percussion groove. And it's kind of a cool, like birth of a groove, so to speak. It's cool to listen to that take place. My only thing is that it feels very generic once all that is established, sort of like it's generic party music, or there's a big celebration, and it's not very intimate. I mean, of course, Man or Muppet is incredibly intimate because it's sort of the emotional centerpiece of that whole movie. So it's a whole different. It's kind of a whole different animal altogether. But and we only played a little bit of the Rio song just now. But I can tell you, for about another 2.5 minutes, it pretty much continues with this barrage of a huge percussion and a whole chorus essentially singing all unison melody with a couple little shouts here or there, or just a little bit of a descant part. But there's it's very simplistic, even with its massive sound that is kind of just coming out and assaulting you. Again, I mean, it's a huge difference from hearing one guy sing about Am I a Man or a Muppet? So that maybe it's not a fair comparison since there are two completely different films. But anyway. But that's our look at the second nominated song leading up to the Oscars. So that was Real in Rio by Sergio Mendes and Carlinhos Brown, with lyrics by Sita Garrett. And so there you are. So there's that plus Man or Muppet, and we look forward to seeing which one gets chosen.
So over the past several weeks, and even some going back several months, we've managed to spend at least a little bit of time talking about what ended up being the Oscar-nominated scores, and now these past 2 weeks, the 2 Oscar-nominated songs. We have the Oscars coming up this next Sunday, February 26th. So Bill, put your predictions in stone right here. It's for all the marbles. What's it going to be? Who's going to win Best Score? And flip a coin. Who's going to win Best Song?
Okay, well, let's go back over the best scores. The 5 of those are, let's see.
So we have our 2 John Williams scores, The Adventures of Tintin and Warhorse.
Mm-hmm.
We have Hugo by Howard Shore. Right? We have The Artist by the guy whose name I'm not going to remember off the top of my head because I'm unprepared as usual.
Ludovic Bors.
Right, thank you. And then Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy by Alberto Iglesias, right?
Correct.
So those are our 5 Oscar-nominated scores, and I remembered 4 out of 5, which isn't bad. And then, of course, we have the 2 songs that we've been talking about, Man or Muppet from the Muppets, and Real and Rio that we just listened to a moment ago. So why don't we start with, why don't you go with score first? What do you think?
I'm not saying this because I like it, but I'm kind of thinking that The Artist will probably win.
That's what I'm going with, too. It's despite some of the criticisms that the film just in general is kind of being overrated.
Yeah.
It certainly seems to be the direction that it's going. And, of course, it won, I think it was like a Golden Globe for Best Score. Yeah. I'm going to agree with you. My guess is that is what is going to win. My personal hope is that probably Warhorse would win, but that's just because I'm a John Williams slappy, and that's the way I roll.
Yeah, I can take down each one of these nominations. Like the 2
Pick
Williams.
Warhorse.
It's like
they're both pick the same one.
What, Dave?
For the record, I'm writing these down, and we will hold you to these next week.
Oh, that's
keeping
fine.
score.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
That's absolutely fine.
And I'm a little disappointed that you both picked the same one.
Well, Tinker Tailor would be my black horse. Wait, is that the dark? Sorry, shit. Dark horse.
Dark horse.
Why has it always got to be a race thing with you, Bill?
I have nothing against dark-haired horses. But
don't write any headlines about Jeremy Lin this week.
Who is that?
Long story. Don't worry about it.
I'm very aware of who that is. I watch Saturday Night Live. But I saw, we've seen all these or listened to score excerpts. Tinker Tailor is a little bit of a dark horse. Hugo, it would be nice if Hugo won, and it could. But Howard Shore and John Williams have both won Oscars, and I kind of feel like they're sort of approached by those guys again, and who's new what do we like?
I feel like the John Williams nominations, like together collectively, probably cancel out the Howard Shore nomination a little bit.
Yeah. So anyway, I think The Artist by Ludovic Bors for score, and I hope Man or Muppet for best song.
Yeah, I'm definitely going with Man or Muppet for best song.
I think with the Muppets Association, that puts them in a little more favorable category. And since most of the people who are going to vote look like Statler and Waldorf anyway from the Muppet Show.
Right. Exactly.
That'll curry favor with the Jim Henson creatures.
Right. So let's recap here. We're both saying Man or Muppet for best song, right?
Yeah.
And we're both saying Artist for best score, even though that's not the one we really want. Is that right?
Yes.
Is this the lamest round of Oscar predictions that has ever been? This is ridiculous.
It could be.
We can't agree on everything. This is just dumb.
Yeah.
So let's see. We're both saying Man or Muppet. We're both saying Artist will probably win, and we're both saying we kind of want Warhorse to win.
Bill went with Tinker Tailor for his second pick.
You're going Tinker Tailor for your sleeper, then? Is that right, Bill?
I'm choosing Tinker Tailor as the long shot that could be like the little score that could.
Okay. But so which one do you want to win?
I'd like Hugo to win.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like
Bill,
Hugo.
you got too many choices. There's like more than half of them that you picked now.
That, right?
No, I'm picking.
They
Tinker
would kick
Tailor
you out of Vegas.
That's just Withamnomics applied to gambling.
That's right.
So no, I guess it'd go between predicting The Artist will win, but kind of hoping Hugo would win.
Okay.
I don't hate the 2 Williams scores, but I kind of feel like they're sort of just more John Williams scores, and I don't know that they're that new or commanding in their existence to say.
And for what it's worth, I think Hugo is a much better film than either of the 2 Spielberg films.
Absolutely.
It's hard to say how much that affects people's opinion of the score, but it certainly has it going for it. The only, we talked about Hugo a few weeks ago, and my biggest complaint, which is an unusual complaint coming from a composer, is that a lot of that film the score was almost just too much out front. But aside from that, it was certainly had lots of lovely things. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll come back into our show next week having found out the winners, and the sky will not have fallen, and hell will still be plenty warm and things like that. So
right. Before we leave, I want to give a shout out to a song that wasn't nominated because the entire score was not submitted for any Oscar consideration at all this year. And that was the score to Rango by Hans Zimmer. But most fun was the song, the Rango theme song, as sung by Los Lobos with trumpet played by Arturo Sandoval, and you just don't get a better, more fun combination than that. And they bring out everything. They've got Ennio Morricone kind of riffs, which you got to have for a Western. They've got this kind of bass baritone guitar, which comes out of, again, those kind of Morricone old Westerns.
Is it a guitarone?
It possibly. I didn't have a chance to look up all the instrumentation, but it's just a fun score, and in a bizarrely, oddly amusing movie at the same time. So we want to end with a little excerpt from Rango by Hans Zimmer and performed by Los Lobos. So that will do it for this episode of Streamers and Punches. You can listen to us on soundnotion.tv/SAP, where you can subscribe to our show, leave comments, and find links to the music we spoke about. You can also subscribe to the show through iTunes. My name is Bill Witham.
And I'm Kevin Wilt.
Thank you for listening.
Out of the dust came a man true and bold, champion of the fandango. By night he drank whiskey, by day killed bad men, and the townspeople knew him as Rango. Coming down the mountainside, the people hailed his name, and of his legend they sang